Chanda as the root of suffering, and Chanda as the source of wholesome qualities. The Buddha used the single compound term Chanda Mulaka in different contexts, sometimes with opposite meanings. In one case it may refer to a wholesome quality, and in another case to an unwholesome quality. It is useful here to examine this discrepancy. The term Chanda Mulaka means having desire as the root, source, or point of origin. In one context, the Buddha states that all forms of suffering have desire as the root, whereas in another context he states that all things have desire as the root. Desire is the root of suffering and of the five aggregates of clinging. Headman. This matter can be understood in this way. Whatever suffering arises, all that arises rooted in desire, with desire as its source, for desire, Chanda, is the root of suffering. That bhikkhu delighted and rejoiced in the Blessed One's statement. Then he asked the Blessed One a further question. But, Venerable Sir, in what are these five aggregates subject to clinging rooted? These five aggregates subject to clinging bhikkhu are rooted in desire, Chanda. These two passages correspond with one another, as confirmed by the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, in which the Buddha states, in brief, the five aggregates subject to clinging are suffering. All of the commentarial and sub-commentarial explanations of the second passage on the five aggregates of clinging are consistent, stating that rooted in desire means rooted in craving tanha, or rooted in covetous desire, tanha chanda. These texts occasionally confirm that these explanations are consistent with craving tanha being denoted as the origin of suffering, dukkha samudaya. B. Desire as the root of all things. The Buddha uttered these words, Chanda mulaka sabe dhamma, which may be rendered as all things are rooted in desire, all things are based on desire, or all things have desire as their source. This key phrase by the Buddha is contained in a longer passage, which can be considered a compilation of 10 major Buddhist principles. It contains important principles of Dhamma practice and culminates in the highest goal of Buddhism. Monks, if wanderers of other sects should ask you, what friends are all things rooted in, what is their culmination, you should answer them as follows. 1. All things are rooted in desire, Chanda mulaka sabe dhamma. 2. All things have attention as their source, manasikara sambhava sabe dhamma. 3. All things originate from contact, passa samudaya sabe dhamma. 4. All things converge upon feeling, vedana samosarana sabe dhamma. 5. All things are headed by concentration, samadhi pamukha sabe dhamma. 6. All things have mindfulness as their sovereign, sattadi pataya sabe dhamma. 7. All things have wisdom as their pinnacle, panuttara sabe dhamma. 8. All things have liberation as their essence, vimutti shara sabe dhamma. 9. All things merge into the deathless, amato gada sabe dhamma. 10. All things culminate in nibbana, nibbana pariyosana sabe dhamma. If you are asked thus, monks, it is in such a way that you should answer those wanderers of other sects. It is clear that all of these factors are vital in Buddhist practice. Together they constitute the cultivation of wholesomeness up to the final goal of Buddhism, and these factors are thus all wholesome in themselves. At the very least, they are neutral factors which may be incorporated in this wholesome framework. For this reason, the term desire Chanda here definitely does not refer to an unwholesome quality. The commentaries explain that all things sabe Dhamma here refers to the five aggregates, i.e. to all conditioned phenomena, Sankata Dhamma. Nibbana is excluded here, as it is the cessation of all conditioned phenomena. Note that in the previous section above, the five aggregates of clinging, upadana khandha, are said to be rooted in desire, and that this desire is equated with craving, tanha. Here, however, the five aggregates, i.e. not as a basis for clinging, are mentioned. How do the five aggregates and the five aggregates of clinging differ from one another? The Buddha said that in the case that the five aggregates are a supportive condition for the mental taints, sawa, and for clinging, upadaniya, they constitute the five aggregates of clinging. If they are free from the taints and from clinging, they are the five aggregates in a sheer or absolute sense. Many subcommentarial passages explaining these 10 factors explicitly state that wholesome qualities are rooted in desire. Chanda mu laka kusala dhamma. Wholesome desire, Chanda, is the source of wholesome things. One of these passages defines this desire specifically as the desire to act, katu kam yata Chanda, which incorporates the desire for virtuous qualities, kusala dhamma Chanda. This includes the love of goodness, kusala Chanda, and the love of truth, dhamma Chanda. See definitive definition for Chanda. When one has considered the various definitions of the term Chanda and thoroughly examined the divergent passages in which it is used, one is prepared to establish a definitive definition for this term. By relying on a mutual understanding of this term, we can establish a standard definition for it in the context of Dhamma study. In brief, the term Chanda encompasses all forms of human desire. Unwholesome negative Chanda is equivalent to the term tanha, because the term tanha is familiar to most students of Buddhism. Negative desire may be replaced by this term. Virtuous wholesome Chanda is called kusala dhamma Chanda. It is sometimes abbreviated to kusala Chanda or dhamma Chanda, as negative desire may be referred to as tanha. It is simple and convenient to refer to wholesome desire by the single term Chanda. Katu kam yata Chanda, the desire to act, is a neutral form of desire. In most cases, this term is used in a positive sense, referring to the desire for virtuous qualities, kusala dhamma Chanda. Therefore, it too may be incorporated into the single term Chanda. Here we can determine to simplify matters by using just these two terms to refer to human desire and motivation. 1. Tanha, unwholesome desire, the desire to consume, to acquire, and to obtain. 2. Chanda, wholesome desire, the desire to act, the desire to bring about integrity and fulfillment. One can feel at ease by making this simple distinction because it accords with an identical distinction made in the commentaries on later texts. In many of the texts, when there is a passage relevant to the subject of unwholesome and wholesome desire, An analysis of these qualities is provided. Although this analysis is not always comprehensive, it is clear that the authors of these texts wished to point out the difference between these two kinds of desire. Note that there is no single passage in which the three aforementioned kinds of desire are clearly listed together. Occasionally a pair of clearly defined terms is used. The most common distinction is as follows: 1. Chanda, desire as craving. 2. Kamyata Chanda, the desire to act. There are two commentarial texts which present a clear amount of these principles dealing with desire. In the Papancha Sudani and the Paramatadipani, desire, here in the Pali term patana is used, may be classified into two kinds. 1. Covetous desire, desire with craving, tanha patana. 2. Wholesome desire, chanda patana. These commentarial explanations support the classification of desire into two distinct kinds. Craving and wholesome desire. As mentioned just above, there are two main motivating forces prompting human beings to act. 1. Tanha, pleasure, delight, desire, lust, and longing that is unwholesome, unhealthy, and unsupportive. 2. Chanda, pleasure, delight, desire, love, and aspiration that is wholesome, healthy, and supportive. A motivation of craving. Tanha may be translated as thirst, craving, yearning, infatuation, fervor, lust, agitation, anxiety, or insatiability. According to the teaching of dependent origination, tanha is conditioned by feeling and rooted in ignorance, avidya. When one receives a pleasurable or displeasurable sense impression, one sees a delightful or loathsome visual form. For example, or hears a melodious or grating sound, and feels either pleasure, pain, or a neutral feeling. Craving arises in one form or another. If one experiences pleasure, then one is glad, delightful, satisfied, fascinated, enthralled, and covetous. If one feels pain, then one is displeased, dissatisfied, and averse, and one wishes to escape or wishes for the feeling to disappear. If one feels a neutral feeling, then one remains indifferent and complacent. These reactions occur automatically. They require no thinking or understanding. On the contrary, if a person reflects on or understands the process, for example, if one knows that loathsome visual object is beneficial, or the melodious sound is in fact an alarm signaling danger, or one is aware that the object is unsuitable on the grounds of ethical or cultural consideration, then craving can be severed and the habitual process can be replaced by a new form of behavior. Craving is dependent on feeling and is reinforced by ignorance. It rests upon feeling and is grounded in ignorance. Because craving is directly tied up with feeling, a person with craving searches for things that will provide pleasing, delightful feelings. There are 6 distinct things that can provide feeling: visual forms, sounds, smells, tastes, tactile objects, and mental objects. The first 5, sights, sounds, smells, tastes, and tactile objects, are connected to the material world and are particularly pronounced. They are referred to as the 5 objects of sensual enjoyment, kama guna. The 6 sense objects, and especially the 5 objects of sensual enjoyment, are both the aim and the source of craving. Craving is thus a thirst for things that provide sensation and a thirst for pleasing sense objects. A desire for pleasing sense objects in order to experience delightful feelings. In brief, craving is the desire to acquire. Craving has further repercussions. The experience of contacting sense objects and experiencing feelings gives rise to a mistaken belief that there is a stable, lasting self that experiences these feelings. Accompanying this belief in a stable, lasting self is a craving for this self to endure. But this biased belief is merely an idea. That is, it is not based on reality, and it tends to generate an opposing belief that inclines in the opposite direction, that the self exists only temporarily, and that it is impermanent and will eventually disappear. These beliefs are connected to the feelings resulting from contact with sense objects. The existence of a self is defined and determined by the experience of pleasant feelings. When a person is gratified by sense contact, the craving for the stability of the self is intensified. But when the person is not gratified by sense contact, then the stability of the self loses significance. If the dissatisfaction with sense contact is strong, then there arises an aversion for the stability of the self. A person wishes for the self to be separated from the present state of existence, or craves for the destruction of the self. This alternative form of craving for annihilation of the self goes hand in hand with the belief that the self exists temporarily and will eventually disappear. These two forms of craving for stability of the self and for self-annihilation exist as a pair and lie in juxtaposition to one another. The first kind of craving, a desire for pleasant sense objects, is also a desire for sense objects to satisfy the self, or a desire for the self to experience pleasant feeling from sense objects. All forms of craving merge at or serve a sense of self. People allow these different forms of craving to direct the course of life by pandering to them, nourishing them, and faithfully obeying them. They are the source of all problems, both personal and social, and they generate expectation, fear, doubt, anger, hostility, carelessness, obsession, and conflict. There are three distinct kinds of craving. 1. Kamatanha, craving for pleasant sense objects to satisfy a sense of self, craving for sensuality. 2. Bhavatanha, craving for the importance, stability, and immortality of the self, craving for existence. 3. Vibhavatanha, craving for the destruction, escape, or annihilation of the self, craving for non-existence. In brief, these three kinds of craving may be referred to as craving for sense pleasure, craving for existence, and craving for non-existence. According to the Buddhist teaching on the mode of conditionality, paccaya, craving leads to seeking, pariyesana or asana, the search to obtain desired objects, which results in acquisition. The acquisition of a desired object marks the end of one stage in the conditional process. Before examining this process more closely, take note that seeking is not the same as doing, and seeking may not involve any form of physical action, as will be discussed below.